Hey there, everybody. Today I want to talk about what got me into perfumery, what was like my purpose, and just kind of starting from the beginning. I've been a collector of fragrances for a couple of years, and I always kind of wondered, how do they get made? Why is one bottle $10, one bottle $1,000? So I figured, what better way than to try doing it myself? This led me down a really deep rabbit hole. And lots of learning, no formal training, lots of trials, lots of research, lots of experimenting. Yeah, I mean, it's more of an art, or it's an art as well as a science. If you have something like a chemistry background, of course, you have a little bit of a leg up, but it's not something that's 100% necessary. If you just put in the time and have the passion for it and work hard for it, you can get something. So what I started with was researching, where to buy materials. What are they even made of? So I found some places online. Perfumer's Apprentice was a good start. One called Creating Perfume. That's where you buy a lot of your aroma chemicals. You can buy some absolutes there. So I start researching what these different individual materials do, what the purpose of them is, what dosages to do them at. So here I have my two journals. So this is my first journal. This is where I would keep track of every single thing that I had. So I started off with, obviously you can't really read it, but these are, I started like a stock list of what I have diluted, how much I have of it. And then this was my first trial formulation. I went through a couple different ways of trialing. Again, no formal training, so I'm not sure how others do it, but what I started with was doing neat, which is you put alcohol, ethanol, I use SDA 40B, which is 200 proof, into a beaker, and then you would take the oil at 100% and drop it in, mix it, and then put on a scent strip and try it. This was a terrible way to do it, especially as a beginner. I had no idea what I was doing. And again, this was just playing around with it, trying to learn about them. I didn't know at that time that you have to learn about tenacity. You have to learn about impact, headspace, stuff like that. So this was just a couple of things. And then I kept a list of all my materials. Eventually I moved off of this journal to something online. So one thing I want to skip to is how you learn about these materials. So I tried finding a lot of stuff on YouTube. There's some good content, but a lot of it just comes from you just doing it. So I did something called a fragrance study. So what I would do is I would take my materials, I would dilute them to 10%, and then I would dab them on a scent strip, and I would smell them, and I'd write down my initial reaction and my initial thoughts and impression about what it is. So here I have tobacco roll, which is really important for tobacco. Initial smells of fruity and earthy smells, slightly sweet on the end. So it's just an initial thought. Some of these things last hours, some of them last days, some of them can even last months at 100% on a scent strip. So I did an initial reaction. I came back an hour later, smelled it and see how it developed. And then it came back 24 hours later and I smelled it again to see how it developed. And I wrote all this stuff down. So I did this with, and I still actually do this with things that I'm not familiar with, which is pretty much most of the materials that I've ever worked with. So this is how I've learned what some of the materials do off the cuff. That doesn't mean that that's how it's gonna act all the time. Some of them bring effects, like allylamyl glycolate is a really, I call it dusty pineapple smell, but it brings a brightness to top notes. So if you don't want just that, you can use it in moderation or small amounts, or what we call trace, to give it an effect rather than the scent profile itself. So I started doing this, and then I started playing with different materials, and then I started coming up with new ways of how I'm formulating. So what I would do is I'd come up with one material or two materials I want to work with, and I try and figure out, well, what would go good with them. Actually, let me back up a little bit. The point of what I was doing when I was making them is because I wanted to make something different and unique. I didn't want to make another mass appealing designer fragrance. I wanted to make something interesting and different. So I thought, well, let's use weird materials, unknown materials. Let's use combinations that aren't used often or at all. So like, let's just try doing that. So I would take one or two materials and I would try and figure out how to blend them. So of course, I talked about in an earlier video is Cafe Fiesta, which is pineapple, rose, and coffee essentially with some vanilla, which just kind of really doesn't sound like it goes together very well because the pineapple and coffee, just because you can imagine in your mind what pineapple tastes like and you can imagine what coffee tastes like, and those two times together you probably think to yourself like sour and bitter, like sour and coffee, just I don't know, it just doesn't sound right. And I get it. But that's what the perfumery aspect of it was learning to blend those things together. And that's the fun part. So it's thinking like, well, what goes with those things? So with the pineapple, you know, there's green mandarin and bergamot, fruity, and something bright to give contrast to the top notes. And then the middle was just pretty much patchouli and rose, which was pretty much what most perfumes have. So I thought, why not give it a try? And it worked out pretty well. And then the base note of vanilla with coffee. I mean, it's pretty standard to give vanilla and coffee together. And it was just experimenting with those different combinations and the different ratios of everything. Sorry, my cat's playing with my tripod. So yeah, that was the fun part of the perfuming process. So it's just getting those couple materials together and thinking in your mind, well, so that's what I have here. I have my idea, and then I have the different materials I think will go with it. There's a lot of research on Fragrantica and just researching other brands and see how they use them in tandem. Not that I'm copying or making clones, but I'm curious to see what they use in combination with certain materials. And again, this is the beginning, so I wanted to try and figure it out myself. So yeah, so these are all my different trials. And again, here's the aroma chemical studies and pretty much everything you have to learn. Let's see what else. Yeah, formulation. I guess I could talk about formulation. Again, it's developed quite a bit, and it evolved over time. In the beginning, it was, like I said, it was just taking a beaker full of ethanol and dropping the material in at 100%. Eventually, I learned that that's not how you do things. And you need to dilute them because some things are really, really, really tenacious or powerful, and one drop of one thing can overpower 50 drops of another thing. So that's where dilution comes into hand, and that's where learning about your materials is really key. Because if you have, let's see, let me show you some materials. By the way, these are my materials. So for pineapple, there's something called Ribes mercaptan. You can't really read it, but this by itself smells like really intensely sulfurous and just really just kind of stinky, almost like a sewer, for lack of better terms. At 100%, it makes me nauseous. So I diluted it down to 0.1%. It's still very strong, but it's enough to give that sulfury side of pineapple. Like, think about sulfur when you think about black currant. It's kind of like that same effect. So this is really important. And this is what gives it that realness. So those kinds of things are really important. That's why you need to learn about your materials individually before you start using them in coherence with everything else. And then once you start doing it once you start mixing those things together, that's when you kind of open up a whole new genre of things. So what I do initially is I do my things drop wise. So I literally take them out of these and I count how many drops I put in the beaker, and that's what I'm counting here, is how many drops I've put of what. So I put what the material is. I didn't do it here, but I put the dilution that it's at, because some things are at 1%, some things are at 10%, some things are at 100%, so it's all over the place. And then, so I do some drops. I figure out what I do one whole session of it. I used to do equal amount of everything because I figured, well, I'm putting all these one materials in the same fragrance, so I might as well just add everything at once. Again, that was a really bad idea, because I figured, well, what I learned eventually was that base notes last the longest typically. So that's something that you want to work on first because it lasts the longest. So I work just on right now, what I do is I work just on my base notes. And then once I get all my base notes figured out, I add my heart notes and I play with the heart notes till I get it where I want. And then I evaluate it for the base notes. And if I lost something in the base notes from adding the heart notes, then I can readjust. And then once I have those things balanced, I go to the top notes and so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a process. You go through a lot of trials. Things have to sit for a little while. They have to macerate. They have to, blend together. Here, I guess I can get that out too. So these are my current trials and different things that I'm working on. So as you can see, there's not very much just because it's just a trial. This is labdanum. Labdanum is my love language. It's a really labdanum heavy fragrance I'm working on. I'm working on some retrials of like Cafe Oud. So these things I typically let sit for a couple weeks and then I go back and reassess. And then just like I do my materials, I reassess them and I look at what changed. Well, what's different, what's more powerful, what's less powerful, what's sticking out more, what's not. So do that a couple hundred times and you'll start to figure it out a little bit. Yeah, and then once you're done formulating, so once you get to where your proportions are that you're looking at, so this is my old way, and my new way is pretty similar. So this is my new journal after I filled that one up in less than a year. So this is where I keep all my recipes. So if you ever see me walking around with this, if you steal it, you have my whole life. So this is the current formulation of something. Don't mind the smudges. But this is, again, so you put the material names here, and I put the number of drops. This is a retrial, so it doesn't have as much going on because I just go from the previous formulation and write that down, and then add stuff onto it or take away whatever I feel like it needs. Yeah, so as you can see, there's just tons and tons. Yeah, so this is my everything book. I've had a lot of experience now with these certain materials where I don't need to study as much, but I mean, there's always new stuff to learn. There's always new materials. There's like 40,000 materials available to the public. Here, I only have about 450, which sounds like a lot, which is a lot, but there's so much more out there. So I'm always getting new materials, studying new combinations, and new ways to add things and to change things. It doesn't mean the stuff that I have now is bad. I just feel like I can always improve on something, no matter what. Even after you've been doing it for 50 years, there's always something you can do. And that's what I think is important about somebody when they're mastering a craft, is that you don't have the thought that, oh, I know everything now. I was a chef for a few years and I was a baker, and I'm still, I still bake and I still cook, but there's still new things that I'm trying that I've never done before that I'm still learning about, even though I did it for years. So there's always room to learn. And again, I think that's what's important. But for me now, my learning process comes from actually doing it. I started getting into chemistry. I started researching chemistry and just learning about aromaticity, stuff like that. Trying to learn about little bits of organic chemistry. And again, it's not completely 100% necessary. I just do it just because I've always found science interesting. And this is applied sciences. That's what I liked about cooking and baking. I used to call myself a culinary chemist because that's what I figured baking was. It was like chemistry. It's you're taking different compounds and you're mixing them together to make something else, and it's chemistry you get to eat. So most of the time it was good. Sometimes it wasn't. But yeah, so that's just a little intro into how I got into perfumery. I'll delve a little bit deeper into doing stuff like trials. I'll post videos of actually doing trials and formulations and things like that at a later video. But again, this was just something quick I wanted to do. I get this question a lot, so I thought it'd be fun to put it out there. So thanks for dropping by. Don't forget to check out the website. Join Patreon. We got a lot of cool things coming up on there. Check out Instagram. I post a lot of shorter things on there on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe if you're interested. All right, we'll see you again on the next one.